A century of U.S. intervention in Venezuela. The United States has employed oil diplomacy, coup support, covert funding, and economic sanctions across 100 years of intervention in Venezuela, culminating in the most severe economic pressure campaign against any nation in the Western Hemisphere. What began as corporate oil extraction backed by U.S. naval power evolved into sophisticated regime change operations with devastating humanitarian consequences. Venezuela's economic collapse, the largest peacetime decline in living standards in modern history, cannot be understood without examining both internal mismanagement and the systematic external pressure applied by Washington. Oil imperialism and dictator support shaped the early relationship. The foundation of U.S.-Venezuelan relations was built on petroleum. Following the 1922 discovery of massive oil reserves in Lake Maracaibo, American companies rushed to extract Venezuelan crude. By 1929, production had exploded from 1 million to 137 million barrels annually, making Venezuela the world's second-largest producer. Standard Oil, Gulf, and Shell controlled 98% of production, while Venezuela received just 8% of revenues during the Gómez dictatorship. The U.S. government actively supported this arrangement. In 1908, the Taft administration provided 3 naval warships to support Juan Vicente Gómez's coup against President Cipriano Castro, who had resisted American corporate demands. Washington immediately recognized Gómez's government and maintained unwavering support for his brutal 27-year dictatorship. A declassified 1950 State Department document candidly admitted that U.S. policy was driven by the objective of assuring an adequate supply of petroleum for the U.S., especially in time of war. When democracy briefly emerged in 1945 to 1948, U.S.-aligned forces quickly reversed it. Rómulo Gallegos, Venezuela's first democratically elected president, was overthrown in November 1948 after only 9 months in office. Upon arriving in exile, Gallegos publicly accused the U.S. military attaché of being present at the presidential palace during the coup and blamed American oil companies for instigating his removal. The Truman administration recognized the new military junta within weeks. The Pérez Jiménez decade demonstrated U.S. priorities. U.S. support for dictator Marcos Pérez Jiménez, 1948 to 1958, represented the clearest expression of American priorities in Venezuela. The Eisenhower administration provided military missions, lend-lease equipment, and arms sales to the regime. In November 1954, Eisenhower awarded Pérez Jiménez the Legion of Merit, the U.S. military's highest honor for foreign leaders, praising his sound foreign investment policies. Meanwhile, the regime's secret police tortured thousands of Venezuelans and operated a jungle prison camp on Guasina Island. When Pérez Jiménez was overthrown in January 1958, he was immediately granted asylum in Miami, where he lived comfortably until extradition in 1963. Venezuelan fury at U.S. policy exploded when Vice President Nixon visited Caracas in May 1958. A mob of 4,000 surrounded his motorcade, smashing windows and nearly overturning his vehicle in what became the most violent attack ever perpetrated on a high American official while on foreign soil. Cold War alignment brought stability but planted crisis seeds. The Punto Fijo Democratic era, 1958 to 1998, saw U.S.-Venezuelan relations stabilize around shared interests. Washington supported the new democracy because President Rómulo Betancourt was staunchly anti-communist, a vital bulwark against Fidel Castro. The Kennedy administration provided substantial aid through the Alliance for Progress, including military assistance and counterinsurgency training against Cuban-backed guerrillas. The 1976 oil nationalization, surprisingly, proceeded without conflict. Venezuela compensated the oil companies, maintained technical partnerships, and ensured reliable supply. As one declassified cable noted, business continued as usual. However, the 1980s debt crisis brought destructive economic pressure. When oil prices collapsed, Venezuela turned to the IMF. President Carlos Andrés Pérez, despite campaigning against IMF-backed reforms, which he called a neutron bomb that killed people but left buildings standing, implemented brutal austerity measures on February 16, 1989. The immediate results? Gasoline prices increased 100%, public transportation fares rose 30%, price controls on basic goods were eliminated, real wages fell below 1950 levels. 11 days later, the Caracazo erupted. For a week, Venezuelans rioted against neoliberal shock therapy. Security forces killed between 276 official count and 3,000 human rights estimates. President George H.W. Bush called Pérez and offered a $450 million emergency loan, but insisted on maintaining the IMF framework. The Caracazo directly produced the 1992 coup attempts by Hugo Chavez and ultimately destroyed the political system the U.S. had supported. Washington's 2002 coup involvement was documented in declassified files. When Hugo Chavez won the 1998 election with 56% of the vote, the Clinton administration adopted a cautious approach, but relations quickly deteriorated. Chavez's oil deals with Cuba, providing one-third of Cuba's supply at 40% discount, directly undermined U.S. policy. His renationalization of PDVSA hurt American firms, and his alliance building with Cuba, Iran, and Russia alarmed Washington. The April 2002 coup against Chavez revealed the extent of U.S. involvement. Declassified CIA documents obtained through FOIA requests proved that U.S. intelligence had detailed advance knowledge. A top-secret senior executive intelligence brief dated April 6, 2002, stated that dissident military factions, including some disgruntled senior officers and a group of radical junior officers, are stepping up efforts to organize a coup against President Chavez, possibly as early as this month. The brief detailed that plotters may try to exploit unrest stemming from opposition demonstrations. When the coup occurred on April 11th, the Bush administration immediately endorsed the false narrative that Chavez had resigned. White House spokesman Ari Fleischer blamed the Chavez government for provoking the crisis. The U.S. was among the only nations to recognize the coup government, reversing position only after diplomatic isolation when OAS countries condemned the putsch. A State Department investigation acknowledged that $3.3 million in U.S. government funds had gone to Venezuelan organizations and individuals, some of whom are understood to have been involved in the events of April 12 through 14. Defense Department official told the New York Times, "We were not discouraging people. We were sending informal, subtle signals that we don't like this guy." U.S. funding networks systematically supported the opposition. Throughout the Chavez era, U.S. agencies built extensive funding infrastructure targeting Venezuelan civil society. NED, National Endowment for Democracy, funding escalated from $257,800 in 1999 to over $1 million annually after 2002. An additional $1 million was awarded immediately after the failed coup. USAID's Office of Transition Initiatives established operations in Caracazo in 2002 with explicit goals to strengthen democratic elements under increasing fire from the Chavez government. Between 2002 and 2010, OTI channeled over $100 million through Venezuelan opposition groups. Recipients included organizations directly connected to coup actors. Sumite, led by Maria Corina Machado, received NED grants. Machado later met President Bush at the White House. The Labor Federation CTV, which participated in both the coup and the devastating 2002-2003 oil strike, received several $100,000 from the American Center for International Labor Solidarity. The 2002-2003 oil strike, organized by U.S.-funded opposition groups, reduced Venezuelan oil production from 3 million barrels per day to under 200,000. This caused $14.4 billion in direct losses and a 25% drop in oil GDP. Declassified documents revealed that Intesa, which controlled PDVSA's computer systems, included executives from SAIC, a U.S. company with former CIA directors on its board. Despite this sustained pressure, Chavez won re-election in 2006 with 63% of the vote, and again in 2012 with 55%. Sanctions transformed from targeted measures to economic warfare. The sanctions regime evolved through distinct phases. Under Obama, measures remained targeted. Executive Order 13692, March 2015, declared Venezuela an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security, but only sanctioned individuals, 7 designations plus visa restrictions on approximately 110 officials. The Trump administration transformed sanctions into comprehensive economic warfare. The August 2017 financial sanctions, EO 13808, blocked Venezuela's access to U.S. financial markets, preventing refinancing and equipment purchases. Economists at the Center for Economic and Policy Research identified this as the critical turning point. Oil production subsequently crashed at more than 3 times the rate of the previous 20 months. The January 2019 oil sanctions were devastating. By designating PDVSA as a specially designated national, Treasury froze $7 billion in PDVSA assets, blocked $11 billion in export proceeds over the following year, ended U.S. crude imports from Venezuela, previously about 500,000 barrels per day, transferred Citgo, Venezuela's U.S. subsidiary, to opposition control. That same January, Trump recognized Juan Guaidó as interim president. Approximately 60 countries followed suit, creating a parallel government structure that ultimately collapsed without achieving regime change. The humanitarian toll has been catastrophic by any measure. Venezuela's economic collapse represents the 5th largest decline in living standards in modern history, unprecedented outside war, revolution, or state collapse. The numbers are staggering. Oil production fell from approximately 2.4 million barrels per day when Maduro took office, 2013, to just 400,000 barrels at its lowest point in 2020, an 83% collapse. While mismanagement contributed to earlier declines, economists estimate approximately 800,000 barrels of the collapse is specifically attributable to sanctions. GDP contracted 75 to 80% between 2013 and 2021. Hyperinflation reached 130,600% in 2018, with some estimates exceeding 1,000,000%. A landmark CEPR study by economists Mark Weisbrot and Jeffrey Sachs, April 2019, estimated that sanctions caused 40,000 plus excess deaths in 2017-2018 alone. They documented 80,000 HIV patients without antiretroviral treatment, 16,000 dialysis patients at risk, 16,000 cancer patients lacking treatment, and 4 million with diabetes and hypertension facing medicine shortages. The study concluded that sanctions would fit the definition of collective punishment as described in both the Geneva and Hague International Conventions. Over 8 million Venezuelans have fled the country, approximately 25% of the population, creating the largest exodus in Western Hemisphere history. Venezuela became the largest source of migrants to the U.S. border after Mexico by 2023-2024. Causes of collapse remain contested but interconnected. The scholarly debate over causation acknowledges multiple factors. Government mismanagement was substantial. Nationalizations, price controls, currency manipulation, corruption, and PDVSA's politicization all contributed to economic deterioration that began before comprehensive sanctions. However, the timeline demonstrates sanctions' decisive impact. While economic problems emerged in 2013-2014, the accelerated collapse coincided precisely with the August 2017 financial sanctions and the January 2019 oil embargo. As the U.S. Government Accountability Office concluded in 2021, sanctions likely contributed to Venezuela's economic decline, with Venezuela selling less oil at higher cost and lower price. The Council on Foreign Relations assessment captures the consensus. Government mismanagement and U.S. sanctions have led to a drastic decline in oil production. Both factors operated synergistically. Sanctions made stabilization nearly impossible, while government policies squandered opportunities for adaptation. Conclusion: intervention produced strategic failure and human tragedy. A century of U.S. intervention in Venezuela has achieved neither stable oil access nor democratic governance. The pattern is consistent. Washington supported dictators when convenient, Gómez Pérez Jiménez, backed regime change when challenged, 2002 coup, Guaidó recognition, and imposed devastating economic pressure when other methods failed. The Guaidó strategy, 2019-2023, exemplifies the approach's limitations. Despite recognition from 60 countries, billions in frozen assets, and comprehensive sanctions, Maduro retained power. The opposition formally dissolved its interim government in January 2023, acknowledging failure. The humanitarian consequences have been profound. Tens of thousands of excess deaths, a quarter of the population displaced, living standards collapsed by 3/4. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has repeatedly called for sanctions to be reassessed and lifted, noting their disproportionate impact on Venezuela's most vulnerable populations. For policymakers, Venezuela offers a cautionary lesson. Maximum economic pressure, combined with recognition of alternative governments, can destroy economies without achieving political objectives, while creating humanitarian catastrophes and massive migration flows that ultimately affect the intervening nation itself.